More than 1,500 inmates are held here. About half of them were once connected to violent gangs. Some are locked inside for 23 hours each day, behind a steel door with a window no larger than a sheet of A4 paper. This is Pelican Bay State Prison, one of the most notorious maximum security prisons in the United States. Some people enter this place after causing a loss of life in the outside world. Others are said to have caused another fatal incident, even after they were already behind bars.
First thing you notice about Pelican Bay? It's so quiet. It's quiet.
In this video, we will go through the top 6 inmates linked to Pelican Bay, who were known for extreme violence. Number 6. Ricardo Medina Jr. At about 10 at night on January 31st, 2015, deputies responded to an emergency call from a remote home in the Green Valley area near Palmdale, California. The caller reported that someone inside was seriously hurt. When officers entered the house, they found only 2 people inside. Joshua Sutter was lying on the floor, and Ricardo Medina Jr., an actor who once played the Red Ranger in Power Rangers Wild Force, was standing nearby. In Medina's hands was a large metal sword, styled after Conan the Barbarian. It had a straight, heavy blade often seen in fantasy films. It was not a prop and not a plastic decoration. It was a real weapon that could cause a fatal injury at close range. Joshua Sutter was not a stranger. He was the brother of Rachel Kennedy, the property owner who had allowed Medina to stay at the animal rescue ranch she managed. At first, bringing Medina there was seen as a chance for him to step away from his old life and restart in a quiet environment. Over time, his presence became a growing source of tension. Kennedy told investigators that Medina became increasingly difficult to manage. He grew irritable, resisted house rules, and argued often about shared living space. These were not small disagreements. They built up and turned into ongoing conflict inside the home. Fearing for her safety, Kennedy asked Joshua to move in. He helped with the ranch work and made her feel safer. But his arrival caused the tension between him and Medina to escalate quickly. Their arguments became more direct and more intense. On that night, a major confrontation broke out. Medina told deputies that he and his girlfriend went into the bedroom and locked the door because they believed Joshua was losing control. According to his statement, Joshua forced his way toward the room, and Medina panicked, then swung the sword in self-defense. However, according to investigators, the scene did not match that account. They found no sign that the door had been forced open. There were no signs of unlawful entry. The position of the objects in the room and the condition of the victim suggested that this was not a sudden defensive reaction. It appeared to be an action carried out at very close range with a weapon capable of causing an immediate fatal injury. Joshua Sutter was rushed for medical treatment, but he lost his life due to the severity of the wound. In one night, one man died, and another man, once just a guest on the property, became the primary suspect in a homicide case. The next day, Ricardo Medina Jr. was taken into custody. Due to missing legal elements at that early stage, he was released while the investigation continued. Nearly 1 year later, in January 2016, officers arrested him again. This time he was charged with homicide. Facing the possibility of a lengthy sentence, Medina agreed to plead guilty to voluntary manslaughter, which is causing another person's death without proof of premeditation. In March 2017, the judge sentenced him to 6 years in state prison, which was the maximum for that charge in California. The sentence immediately sparked debate. Joshua Sutter's family said the punishment was far too light for the loss they suffered. Many in the public were stunned that the name Ricardo Medina Jr., once tied to a children's television hero, now appeared in a California criminal case. After the sentencing, Medina entered the prison system. According to custody records, his name appeared among inmates who were transferred to Pelican Bay State Prison, a maximum security facility built for individuals considered difficult to control and at high risk for violence. There were no stage lights, no cameras, no audience. From that point forward, Medina's life remained behind concrete walls and high steel fences. From a familiar face on screen, he became another name inside the California corrections system and one of the many people who passed through the gates of Pelican Bay. This story is not a fictional script. It is the result of unresolved conflict, a moment that went beyond control, and an action that ended another person's life forever. Number 5. Lloyd Avery II. At about 4 in the afternoon on July 1st, 1999, in the Santa Barbara Plaza area between the neighborhood known as the Jungle in Baldwin Village in South Los Angeles, two people were resting under a tree when a man walked toward them. That man was Lloyd Avery II, an actor who had appeared in the film Boys in the Hood. But at that moment, there was no roll and no camera. There was only the reality of the street. The conversation turned into an argument almost immediately. According to court records, Avery believed the couple in front of him were tied to a drug debt in territory controlled by the Bloods, where he was trying to assert himself cheap. There was no sign that this was a warning meant to intimidate. Avery pulled out a handgun and fired at Annette Lewis at very close range. Moments later, he pointed the weapon at Percy Branch and fired again, aiming directly at them. Annette Lewis lost her life that day. Percy Branch survived for a short time before passing away from complications related to the wound. In broad daylight, in a crowded residential area, a double fatal attack unfolded in front of the community. The incident shocked residents even more because the shooter was the same person who had acted in the scene where Ricky is shot in Boys in the Hood. On film, it was only a performance. In real life, Avery had fired at real people on a real street. There were no cutscenes and no chance for a retake. After the incident, Avery did not disappear immediately. He continued to appear around Los Angeles for a short period and even took a few small roles. But the name Lloyd Avery II was no longer tied to acting. It was tied to gun violence and to the two deaths at the Jungle. On December 8, 1999, Los Angeles officers arrested Avery near his grandmother's home in the Beverly Hills area after a short pursuit. Nearly 1 year later, he went to trial on first-degree homicide charges. The jury found that Avery caused the death of Annette Lewis and was responsible for the fatal outcome involving Percy Branch. The sentence for Avery was life in prison, without the possibility of early release. From a face once seen on the big screen, he officially became a violent offender in the California prison system. Avery was transferred to Pelican Bay State Prison, the maximum security facility in Crescent City that holds inmates considered at high risk for violence and difficult to manage. It is a place where even a small mistake in supervision can lead to deadly consequences. Inside the prison, Lloyd Avery II changed his image completely. He carried a Bible, spoke often about religion, and some inmates called him Baby Jesus. Avery believed he had a spiritual mission behind the concrete walls and steel bars. In 2005, the prison administration housed Avery with Kevin Roby, an inmate with a severe history of violence and an extreme belief system that clashed entirely with Avery's. Two men with opposing worldviews were locked together in a small space inside one of the toughest prisons in the United States. There were no cameras to record what happened inside that cell. When staff checked the room, Lloyd Avery II was found deceased. Forensic findings indicated he died after a violent attack that caused asphyxiation and significant trauma. Avery's death triggered strong criticism of the management at Pelican Bay. People questioned why two inmates with such a high potential for conflict were placed together and why it took hours to discover a death inside a maximum security unit. Lloyd Avery II, the man who once shot Ricky on screen and later fired at real people on the streets, ended his life inside Pelican Bay. There was no redemption arc and no return. All that remained was a death file in the California prison system and a name tied to violence both in the movies and in the real world. Number 4. Dameshlo Green. At 4:28 in the morning on May 14, 2014, the 911 center in Sacramento received an emergency call from a home in South Sacramento near Florian Road and 24th Street. The caller was panicked and said someone had been shot inside the house. When officers and medics arrived, they confirmed that 31-year-old Tamisha Ridge was found deceased in the downstairs bedroom. Inside the same home, her 3 young children were still asleep upstairs. A family member was lying in the living room. Her current boyfriend, Lee Williams, was still in the bedroom next to the place where Tamisha had just been fatally wounded. There was no sign of forced entry. No items were disturbed. There was no indication of a robbery. The only person targeted was Tamisha. Just hours before the fatal incident, Dameshlo Green, Tamisha's former boyfriend, had flown from Texas to Sacramento. In the days leading up to the attack, he had repeatedly called and sent messages, putting intense emotional pressure on her. He begged her to reconcile and threatened consequences if she refused. That evening, Dameshlo stopped responding. According to court records, early on the morning of May 14th, Green went to Dameshlo's home. The door was unlocked. He carried a shortened shotgun, a type of weapon considered extremely dangerous in a confined space and at close range. He did not wander through the house. He did not look for anything. He walked straight to the bedroom. In the dark room, Dameshlo was still lying on the bed. Lee Williams woke up when he realized someone was standing there. A brief struggle unfolded in only a few seconds. Moments later, Green fired the weapon at very close range next to the bed. Dameshlo Ridge lost her life instantly. She had no chance to resist, no chance to escape, no chance to defend herself. That single shot ended the life of a mother of 3, a woman raising her children on her own, and a YouTube creator with hundreds of thousands of followers who had built her fashion brand from a young age. After the attack, Green left the house. But instead of fleeing farther, about 5 hours later, he appeared at the county jail on a probation violation. Officers detained him there and quickly identified him as the primary suspect. Investigators then reviewed Green's past. This was not his first act of violence. He had a long history of assaults on women, multiple court cases involving domestic abuse and sexual misconduct, and a prior sentence for attacking an earlier girlfriend. Dameshlo was not the first person he harmed, but she was the one who paid with her life. The first trial in 2016 ended without a verdict because jurors could not agree on who pulled the trigger in the final moment. Green insisted it was an accident. Prosecutors presented a clear sequence of events. He flew from Texas, carried a firearm, went to the victim's home in the middle of the night, and walked straight into her bedroom. In the second trial in 2018, the jury concluded that Dameshlo Green was guilty of first-degree homicide with a firearm enhancement. The judge sentenced him to 75 years to life, a punishment that effectively meant he would spend the rest of his life in prison. Green entered the high-security prison system of California, ultimately sent to Pelican Bay State Prison, a facility built for inmates considered extremely dangerous. This is not a place for leniency. With his repeated violence and his overwhelming sentence, the only path left for him is to live out his remaining years behind bars. There was no apology, no second chance, only a final record stating that Dameshlo Green caused the death of Dameshlo Ridge in her own home while her children slept upstairs. Today, he is held inside one of the toughest prisons in the United States. And that is why his name appears on the list of the most violent inmates ever connected to Pelican Bay. Number 3. Carrie Stayner. On the night of February 15, 1999, at Cedar Lodge, a small motel at the entrance to Yosemite National Park in California, 3 women on vacation lost their chance to see the next morning. They were 42-year-old Carole Sund, her 15-year-old daughter, Julie Sund, and their 16-year-old friend, Silvina Peloso. After returning to their room from dinner, all 3 were attacked and died later that night. The person responsible was Carrie Stayner, a handyman working at Cedar Lodge. He was not an outsider who forced his way in. He had keys. He had access. He knew who stayed in which room and who was traveling alone. He observed, selected, and approached the victims under the pretense of a maintenance check. From that moment on, he had full control. According to his later confession, before killing them, 2 teenagers, Julie and Silvina. After that, he ended the lives of all 3 women. In a methodical way. There were no outside witnesses, no loud noises, only 3 lives erased inside a motel room in a place many believed was perfectly safe. Weeks passed as search teams covered Yosemite and the surrounding areas without finding a clear lead. That changed on March 18, 1999, when a burned rental car was found in a remote area outside the park. Inside the vehicle, authorities discovered the remains of Carole Sund and Silvina Peloso, severely burned. Julie Sund's body was still missing. Days later, the FBI received a letter with a hand-drawn map that pointed to a location near Don Pedro Lake. On that map, the sender wrote a chilling message. "We had fun with this one." Fingerprints on the envelope were identified as those of Carrie Stayner. He had not only taken lives, he had taunted investigators by directing them to the 3rd victim. While the nation was still shaken by the Yosemite case, another killing occurred on July 21, 1999. 26-year-old Joy Ruth Armstrong, an environmental researcher living alone in a small cabin in the forest, was found deceased near her home. Her body showed injuries so severe that investigators immediately recognized it as a deliberate and extremely violent attack. A vehicle parked nearby was identified as belonging to Carrie Stayner. At that point, the pieces of the investigation aligned. The quiet handyman seen around the tourist area each day, someone no one had suspected, was the person responsible for 4 deaths in only a few months. On July 24, 1999, the FBI arrested Carrie Stayner at a resort in California. During questioning, he admitted to killing Joey Armstrong and confessed to the 3 earlier killings at Cedar Lodge. He also told investigators that thoughts about abducting and killing women had followed him since childhood, lingering for many years before he acted on them. In federal court, Stayner pled guilty to the death of Joey Armstrong and received a sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole. The 3 Yosemite victims were handled in California State Court. Although his attorneys pointed to past mental health issues, the jury concluded he fully understood his actions and was legally responsible. In 2002, Carrie Stayner received the death sentence for 3 counts of first-degree homicide with multiple special circumstances. He was transferred to death row at San Quentin State Prison, a unit that holds some of the most dangerous inmates in California. People who encountered Stayner in prison described him as quiet, withdrawn, and emotionally cold. There were no clear signs of remorse, no indication of sincere regret. Only a man following the routines of prison life, as if the 4 victims never existed. California currently maintains a moratorium on executions. That means Carrie Stayner will likely never face an execution chamber and will instead grow old behind bars. But the death sentence remains, standing as a statement about the severity of his actions and the brutality of what he carried out. Outside the prison walls, Yosemite continues to welcome millions of visitors each year. The scenery remains grand and peaceful. But the name Carrie Stayner has become an unerasable part of the park's history, not as a figure of nature, but as a shadow that once moved within it, leaving behind 4 deaths and a case file that will never disappear. Number 2. Kevin Roby. On January 31st, 1987, at a home in South Los Angeles, Kevin Roby called police with a voice that sounded panicked. He claimed that his sister, Velma Lynn Hill, had just been taken by 3 men dressed like Japanese ninjas. Roby described the scene in detail, speaking as a helpless witness who saw intruders escape and portraying himself as the only survivor. But when officers asked Roby to walk them through the scene, the ninja story fell apart immediately. Inside the house, they found Velma Lynn's body in a trash container, covered with dog food. There was no team of masked men. There was no abduction. Velma Lynn had been sexually assaulted and lost her life due to signs consistent with asphyxiation. According to investigators, the person responsible was her own brother. The investigation revealed another truth. Velma Lynn was not the only victim in the family. Roby had previously assaulted another sister. These actions were not a sudden outburst. They showed a long-running pattern of violence inside his own household. In 1988, a court sentenced Kevin Roby to life in prison without the possibility of parole for homicide and sexual assault. From someone who once studied at the United States Air Force Academy, he became one of California's most dangerous offenders. Due to the severity of his crimes and his volatility, Roby was transferred to Pelican Bay State Prison, the maximum security facility in Crescent City that houses inmates considered impossible to manage through ordinary means. At Pelican Bay, Roby did not remain just another prisoner. He began creating a new identity for himself. Roby called himself the Satanic Christ, describing his role as a dark counterpart to traditional religion. In letters and handwritten notes, he wrote about rituals, missions, and the idea that another person's death could serve his message. This was violence wrapped inside an extreme belief system. In 2005, Pelican Bay staff assigned Roby to share a cell with Lloyd Avery II, another inmate who had once appeared in the movie Boys in the Hood before his conviction. Unlike Roby, Avery had become deeply religious in prison, carried a Bible, and often tried to persuade others to turn away from violence. 2 men with opposite worldviews were locked together inside a small cell within a maximum security unit. On September 4, 2005, their conflict crossed a deadly line. Inside the cell at Pelican Bay, Kevin Roby attacked and killed Lloyd Avery II. Avery died in the cell from trauma and asphyxiation after the assault. The incident became one of the most notorious scandals in Pelican Bay's history, not only because of the death itself, but because of the way it went undetected. For nearly 38 hours, Avery's body remained inside the cell without being discovered. During multiple head counts, Roby positioned the body in ways that made staff believe Avery was still alive. When an officer finally entered the cell for a direct check, the truth was fully exposed. The room had been turned into the scene of what Roby described as a ritual. He had drawn distorted religious symbols on the walls and floor, making Avery's death part of the ideology he practiced. Lloyd Avery's family pushed for Roby to face a new trial for the killing inside the prison. But because Roby already carried a sentence of life without parole, prosecutors declined to pursue additional charges, stating there was no further penalty available. Roby's violence did not end at Pelican Bay. Nearly 40 years after killing his sister, in 2024 at the California Institution for Men in Chino, Roby attacked a correctional officer with a makeshift weapon, injuring the staff member. Even at an older age, after spending most of his life behind bars, Roby continued to pose a serious danger to anyone near him. Within the record of Kevin Roby, there are at least 3 categories of victims: family members, a cellmate at Pelican Bay, and correctional staff. His violence did not happen in a moment. It spanned decades. And inside Pelican Bay State Prison, a facility built to contain the most dangerous individuals, Roby not only continued that violence, but added another death within walls designed to prevent it. There was no redemption, no return. Only a name recorded in the California corrections system, and a long chain of actions that made Kevin Roby one of the most violent, dangerous, and unmanageable inmates ever held at Pelican Bay. Number 1. Roy Norris. On the night of June 24, 1979, along a coastal road in Southern California, a young woman stood by the shoulder holding a hitchhiking sign. A white GMC van with no side windows slowed to a stop. Inside were 2 men, Roy Norris and Lawrence Bittaker. From the moment the sliding door closed, it was no longer a ride. It was the beginning of one of the most violent crime sprees in California history. That van was not a normal vehicle. It had been turned into a moving space of captivity where all control belonged to the 2 men in the front seats. There were no witnesses, no escape routes, and no chance for anyone outside to hear what was happening inside. But what took place during the summer and fall of that year was not a sudden act carried out in a moment of rage. It was prepared long before. Before the van ever appeared on the road, Norris and Bittaker met inside a California state prison. In the yard, behind razor wire and under the watch of officers, they did not talk about starting over. They talked about abducting young women. They talked about leaving no witnesses. They talked about the sense of power that came from another person's fear. And when they were released, they remembered every part of those conversations. From June through October of 1979, Norris and Bittaker traveled along coastal highways, beaches, and the San Gabriel Mountains. They targeted girls between 13 and 18 who were alone and believed they were meeting 2 ordinary men. 5 victims lost their lives. 2 bodies have never been recovered. The final victim, taken on Halloween night in 1979, was found the next morning on a front lawn in a quiet suburb. Not in a remote forest, not in the desert, but in a place where people walk their dogs every morning. During the investigation, detectives discovered an audio tape that captured what happened inside the van. Those recordings were later described as some of the most disturbing evidence in American investigative history. At the same time, police located another victim who had survived and could describe the van and the 2 men. That lead brought detectives to the homes of Norris and Bittaker. Inside, police found more than 500 Polaroid photographs of young women, including several who had died or were missing, along with tools used for restraint. The white van, the center of everything, was also seized. Facing the possibility of a death sentence, Roy Norris chose to cooperate with investigators. He admitted his role in the crimes to avoid execution and testified against Lawrence Bittaker. In 1980, Norris received a life sentence with the possibility of parole after several decades, a possibility that never came to pass. For many years, Roy Norris remained in the California prison system. In the late 1990s, he was transferred to Pelican Bay State Prison, the maximum security facility built for inmates considered extremely dangerous and difficult to control. His presence there showed the level of risk attached to his file, even though Pelican Bay was not his long-term placement. Norris was later moved to the Richard J. Donovan Correctional Facility in San Diego. Reports from that time noted that he showed no signs of genuine remorse. Every request for parole was denied. He was eventually transferred to the prison hospital at the California Medical Facility in Vacaville, where he died in 2020, ending the life of one of the most violent serial offenders California ever held. Today, Roy Norris's record is no longer a headline. It is thousands of pages of investigative files, photographs, audio tapes, and statements from the survivors. And when Pelican Bay is discussed, his name remains an example of why maximum security prisons are not built for people who simply made a mistake. They are built for those whose violence has become a part of how they exist. Roy Norris was not just a killer. He was one of the reasons so many steel doors had to be built, and one of the reasons they will never open again.